Good morning, everybody, and happy Friday. Call to order the Policy and Equity Committee meeting for Friday, August 23rd, 2024. Grateful that everybody is here. Maybe we'll go around the room and starting with Phyllis, and if people can just share who they are and their role, and then we'll get started.
Randolph,
There we go. Chief Information Officer.
Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer.
Jim Crossett, board member.
And Ben Lindy, board member.
Kendra Matt, board member. Shauna Murphy, interim superintendent.
Dan Hoying, General Counsel.
Chris Burkhardt, Chief Operating Officer.
Jessica Shelley, Director of Student Dining Services.
Stephanie Scott, Assistant General Counsel.
You're fine.
The table's great. Thank you for coming. Welcome, everybody. Our longtime policy committee chairperson, Mike Morosky, stepped down in July. We're delighted to welcome new board member Jim Crossett to the policy committee. Glad you're here. Mr. Morosky was chair of this committee for, I think, 45 years. So it's going to be a minute here to figure out how we do this without him. But I think the first thing we need to do is elect a committee chair. And I wanted to ask my colleagues if anybody wanted to put their name forward. I'll share that, Mike leaves some big shoes to fill. I think we have a great group on this board. And I shockingly somehow find myself as the person here who's been on the board the longest. And so I'm going to extend my name to be chair, but I also would welcome other nominees if people would like to.
I second that.
Thank you. All right. So to be any other nominees? Okay, so just to formalize that, all in favor of me serving as committee chair just for the remaining several months of this calendar year, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we've finished our first item on the agenda. Thank you. So we're going to try to live up to Mike's reputation for starting on time and ending on time. So I think maybe could I invite General Counsel to share just a minute or two. I'm thinking particularly for Mr. Crossett, just about like how we've run these committees in the past, what the scope of the policy committee often is, and then we can get into some of the items.
Yes. So each policy committee has been a little bit different, but in general, we take up sort of board policies existing. So the policy committee has at times done a sort of 3-year or 4-year cycle of review where we look at every policy. But then there are also policies that come up throughout the year that a particular board member has an interest in, or the board as a whole is asking the policy committee to review. There are times when administration brings policies to the committee to say we'd like to review this policy. Today, the committee actually has not met since May, just through some scheduling. And so administration has a few policies in addition to what was on the board agenda that we'd like to bring to your attention. So from facilities, Chris is here. From purchasing, and then dining services, the wellness policy, we'd like to spend a few minutes on today. And then the rest are were on the board agenda.
Any questions you'd like to ask Mr. Crossett about just scope or about how we've done things in the past?
Not yet.
Okay. And Mr. Hoying, can you remind me, this is something I really should know, but at the beginning of the year, did we do a work plan with like a calendar for what was going to happen for the rest of the?
We distributed a work plan, and there were certain policies that were highlighted by board members. I'll have to go back to minutes to look at.
That's okay. Yeah. I was just hoping what we could do is, I wanted to do two things between now and our next meeting. And we're in the middle of the month here, towards the end, actually in August. We'll meet earlier in September. So it's going to be, I think, a quick, stretch between now and next meeting. I was going to invite Ms. Mapp and Mr. Crossett and myself, I think, to share any policy related topics they would like to see the committee take up between now and the end of December, and then just invite the administration to do the same, and see if we could put together just a schedule. So, we've got a September, an October, a November, a December meeting. When we meet in September, we could maybe we could do some work between now and then to get a draft together. And then in that meeting, we could look at it together, make any changes, and then we'd have a schedule for what we're going to take on for the rest of the year. Does that sound good to board members and to administration?
Sounds great.
Interim superintendent, does that work for you?
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add? Okay. Great. So, we have a wonderful set of interesting things to talk about this morning, and we can also get a plan in place for what we're going to tackle for the rest of the year. Okay. So with that, we'll turn it over to item 2 on the AI policy.
So our teachers were involved in really looking at the framework and prepping us for kind of looking at how we can evaluate AI within the district on a bigger scale. Not only did that work come to produce the product of a lot of the framework in the policy that's before you today that we're hoping, that you can look at for consideration, along with working with legal counsel to revise that. But it's put us in a pretty good place that once we are comfortable and ready to move forward with a policy in place, that we have a couple of next step milestones that we've been able to start approaching and prep for, at least in consideration, in terms of things like Google Gemini. We are primarily a Google shop within the district, so we've been looking at their AI product Gemini, and we are poised to be able to release that to the staff and do some support around that and what our uses could look like as a first step once we get the policy in place, as well as some further evaluations. As you know, this market's really booming right now. So there are hundreds of AI products that are coming to the market almost every day. A lot of those are geared towards K-12. So once we get kind of the policy and our next steps of a large product in place that we're looking at, then we can start looking at some of the selection and evaluation on K-12 specific products, along with our curriculum to make sure that we have AI supported curriculum in place. So that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of an update and what our next steps are as the committee and the board works through the policy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gollihue. Questions from board members?
I have a question. Is there going to be a process in place to evaluate all these new software applications that are coming out for K-12? Will there be, how will we know we're selecting good ones after this policy is in place, and effective ones, or maybe there's some out there that are transformative? How do we know?
Yeah, so it really takes on the form of two kind of avenues, right? The first avenue is what we would refer to kind of as a selection committee. It's our traditional thing we would do, whether that's AI software or any other curriculum software, where we would put together stakeholder representation across the district, invite in and then look at a number of products that are in the scope of what we want to provide as a service. The second avenue really comes pilots, even potentially grant efforts, so that we can start, seeing each of those in a controlled environment, and then always with the potential to grow.
Thank you.
So thank you. So my question is very similar to Board Member Crossett's. So I hear you saying that there'll be maybe some initial work to identify what is the best, program or partnership. Will there be continual audits throughout the time frame to ensure that these programs that maybe we subscribe to or connect with are efficient, and also maintaining just the safety and the security of our for our students and for our district overall?
Yeah, so we have um standard practice within kind of any solution that we bring in terms from a contract of what the response for them to even be able to provide a contract to us includes a set of security criteria defined around like SIPA, FERPA, student activities for private information. So anything that would come in would be under a contract that includes those provisions. Then we do, our normal check-ins like every annual or what's defined per what the contract would require.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, I think it says on here pertaining to, including obtaining necessary consent for data collection and processing. So are we going to require that consent forms are in place for maybe our students to use the AI platforms, just because, there may be parents that have concerns about privacy and security? How will we kind of navigate that process?
So that's still a little bit of in development work in terms of, because it's going to be product specific.
Mhm.
So if we were looking at a K-12 specific solution, which we're looking to gear up to try and select something and look at soon, would really be controlled within the contract terms as to how they would do each one. And then we would have the district's AUP, the acceptable use policy for students, updated to reflect much of the material in this policy, so that it would basically be part of that overall structure that we offer for students and protecting their information, as opposed to individual sign-offs necessarily. But if the product we were looking at were to be something outside of our normal data controls, then we would look at making sure they have data controls and potentially, parental consent if needed.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Crossett, others?
I was just going to suggest that we might want to have internal audit, do a risk assessment of how it's going and periodic review.
It's great.
Thank you both for the questions, and thank you for the work that you all have done. See other questions, and we'll take them in just a second. Can you just say again, Jeremy, your hope, or Dan, your hope with respect to this policy from the committee today? Were you hoping that we then pass this on to the board, that we continue to circulate it, socialize it, get feedback on it? I'm coming with no prior on what the answer to that should be. I just wanted to make sure I was following where you all wanted to go next.
Well, I'll let Dan add to it, and just in case I use the wrong terminology, but I believe our intent was to have the committee review it today to, provide feedback if necessary, but if not, to look and see where their comfort level was with what's in it today to be able to pass to the board for ultimate adoption.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I see Julie, did you have a comment?
Yes, there was a AI committee that was formed, but they only met a couple of times. And I don't think they had really the input or any kind of final conclusions. I think that before we do anything with this policy, we need to take this policy back to that committee. Because if we're asking people to sit on a committee to volunteer their time, there should be some input on the final thing, and they were never included with any of the final conversations. I know that we are having a committee that is also working on AI for teachers, because the teachers are feeling kind of left out on any kind of conversations about what is acceptable, how is it going to be used within their school.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All things considered, Jeremy, I think would look to you all. Do you feel like this is in a spot where you're ready for it to move forward to the full board?
We did. And just to reiterate, I'll happily follow up with Ms. Sellers. And we really look forward to collaborating and working with their team as well. But this did run through the AI task force, and I know they did provide feedback on the final product.
But
so
I don't think that the teachers told me that they were never, after like 2 meetings, they never came back. Is that accurate? I think that it stayed with the district.
Not to my knowledge,
Okay.
but we can definitely discuss.
Okay, thank you.
So I think for us, the committee members, we should decide today whether we're comfortable taking this to the full board on the next board meeting, when we could do this well. I think some of the meeting materials for Monday have already posted. So that if we were to do this, not for Monday, but we were to do this for an upcoming meeting, the next meeting after Monday, I would certainly support that, given the work the administration has done. But I wanted to hear from my colleagues. Jim, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that sounds right to me, but I do think that because there's some time, that there should be an opportunity for the teachers to get their input. There's time for them to add that to whatever, some comments or something that could be helpful at the board meeting.
And then Kendra.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that we've had an opportunity to have a little bit of time with it, but again, I think it's very, I think it's necessary that as many eyes that we can have on it, especially if our teachers are going to be expected to use it, we want to make sure that it aligns with things that they believe are important as well. And so, I just hope that, we don't have oversight. So as many eyes that we can have on it, I think is a great recommendation.
Yeah, I think it'd be fine to have the not slow down the process and just have their review be simultaneous with what they're doing timing wise.
So what I'm hearing, and just to make sure I've captured this correctly, so everybody's got clarity on next steps. We're going to put this on the agenda as recommended from the policy committee, not on Monday, but at the board meeting that follows that one. And there's an opportunity between now and then for any subsequent revisions that you all would like to do or take into account, or voices you'd like to make sure are captured. And we'll look forward to hearing those updates at that board meeting.
That's good.
Great. Moving on.
Yeah. Next board meeting, by the way, after Monday is, I believe, September 9th. So it'll be on the agenda for September 9th.
Okay. So cellular telephones.
Thank you. I'll start this, although we have Assistant Superintendent Randolph here with us as well. Just for background and kind of a reminder, the policy committee did a pretty extensive review of the cellular telephone policy earlier this year, culminating in changes being adopted by the full board on May 29th, 2024. I can't remember if that was the policy committee or the board meeting, but at the end of May, there were changes adopted. At the same time, there was some, in Columbus, there was also talk of cell phone policies. The governor included it as a major issue in the governor's State of the State speech. That followed a bill being passed by the General Assembly, House Bill 250, which included some mandatory sort of policy changes for school districts across the state. We chose to move forward with our changes, knowing that we might have to come back and take another look based on in light of the statute being passed, and that's all we've done here. So we have added some magic language from that statute, which says all school districts basically shall have a policy, quote, that limits students' cellular telephone use and cellular telephone related distractions as much as possible during school hours. So we've added that language just to make sure we're up to date with the statute. In addition, the statute required, and by the way, it's a good idea to say that students shall be permitted to use ECDs for purposes documented in a student's individual education plan or Section 504 plan, medical plan, doctor's orders. These are kids who have, for example, like a diabetes monitor on their phone. They have to be able to use that. By the way, that was already being done in the district. If you remember Principal Williams' presentation about Hughes, she talked about that she gives those kids who need it for a medical reason a different pouch. This is the Yonder pouch that's opened with Velcro. So this is something we were doing, but we have now expressly added to the policy. Those are the biggest two changes. I'd invite Assistant Superintendent Randolph to just talk about kind of where we are with cell phone use so far this school year.
So we have already implemented at all of the high schools the no phone policy or limited use, knowing that some of the programs will require that. We ordered the Yonder pouches in June, and they are being delivered. We have received about half of them yesterday, and the other half are slated to deliver today. Each school has an implementation team. We've met with Yonder several times, and every school is meeting with them individually as well to ensure that we implement, because if you recall from Dr. Williams' presentation, really the parent, community and staff and student engagement is really important. So that is a piece that each school is working on, and everyone has a anticipated rollout date. Every school has created or is working on, I should say, is currently working on a plan around how to implement. We have Aiken and Hughes doing it now. Aiken have their devices early. So they started day one, and I don't know, Julie might be happy to hear that when I was at their dismissal, teachers were yelling out the window to me, but they love the Yonder pouches. So, I think it has been a big shift, and definitely, we're need to continue to evaluate, make sure that we understand how to use them. I am working on some district level, alignment, because we want to ensure that, you know, we don't want any exclusionary consequences for students. Jen talked about that as well, how important that was. So ensuring that, you know, we aren't removing students from school if they have them, because we want to make sure that students are in school, and the purpose of, you know, eliminating this electronic communication is so students have a better opportunity to learn. Also looking at mental health toolkit, Monisha said she was gonna reach out to Susan Shelton, and also with the PBIS team, focus on or creating a toolkit that was focused on some other ideas and opportunities for students during the time that they don't have the phones. We see that there is a true cell phone addiction in some cases, so really the anxiety that goes around not having it. Also, this should be something that's monitored around the one plan, and again, monthly at PBIS committees. So really working collaboratively with that team as well to ensure that we're putting all the supports in place for the schools. I'm sure there's a lot, but.
Thank you very much. Questions, Kendra, Jim?
It's not a question, comment. I was at Hughes on day one and Yonder was there.
Yeah, she's in year two, so, you know, they had they were probably a little more familiar. I know Principal Votaw said day one, they had some learnings on day one that they had to move into day two, and day three, they said they were much, from day one to day three was much more efficient and effective. So going to be a learning process.
Thank you for providing that information. My question is, so the Yonder pouches have been ordered specifically for the high schools, correct?
So we, initially, they were ordered for all 7 through 12.
Okay,
So that included some of our K-8s. And so they have a delivery, but we did a hold on the K-8s until right now. I've been doing all of this work with our 7 through 12s and our K-12s. So SCPA does have them in service boiler.
Mhm.
So in order to stay in alignment with the policy, we wanted to ensure that we want schools to be able to create something that is uniform. We didn't want 7th and 8th graders at the K-8s to have Yonders, but maybe not the 5th and 6th. So how we're going to implement based on the number that we have. So,
okay. And so I think if I'm hearing you correctly, so the K through 6 schools, they don't necessarily have the Yonder pouches. So what does that uniformity look like for them? Is it required that each school still come up with their own specific rollout to honor the policy, or is it something that as administration we're
Yeah.
assisting with?
And speaking with Deb Klein, she has most of our elementaries. She did say that they were working on ensuring that there's a uniform policy, but it will not at this time include Yonder pouches, but ensuring that students, many schools ordered little plastic cases to keep the phones in. Some already, well, most already had policies in place. So she did say she's going to work on that piece.
Okay, thank you.
And then my only question, I just to say thank you for the work. Appreciate it. I hear, when you checked, I was hearing this right. There's a mix of things in here. There's some state statute required things that have happened since we last looked at this policy. And there are some improvements that are coming from the administration so that we can create the best kind of learning environment for kids. And we've got both of those in here. And the hope is that we would put this on the agenda for adoption of the next relevant board meeting. Is that accurate?
I think it has to be in place per state law by July 1, 2025. So we have some time, but
We have some time.
it's ready whenever
Okay.
the committee is ready.
I have a hunch that something else will come up
Got it.
between now and July 2025. So let's get it done. And then so could we, Phyllis, put this on for the 9th? Or does that same September board meeting, whatever that first one is? Yeah. Great. Anything I'm missing on this one?
Just a
Interim
question.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Lindy. Do you think the board would be interested in hearing more of what Ms. Randolph just shared with you during the board
Yeah,
meeting?
Mhm.
And then we might have a opportunity to give you an update on exactly where we are.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation, and I love the revisions that were made. I think it puts a lot of, specific details in here so we can ensure that we are all in alignment. So thank you for the work that you all have done, and I will be in favor of that.
So we'll ask Ms. Randolph to prepare a brief presentation.
It can be very short. Very short. Great. Great. Okay, so we have done item 1, item 2, item 3. We are now moving on to something else that's not controversial, school uniforms.
I'm actually glad this is on the agenda.
Yeah, so I think this was recommended to be included on the agenda by a community member and who might be with us today. It's a good policy, actually, and we included 2 policies. So one is the school uniform policy and the second is the dress and
Yeah,
grooming.
that
So they're
one,
both included in what we sent out to board members. Did not presume to make any sort of recommendations or changes. So these are the existing policies that are in place for school uniforms and dress and grooming. We've got lots of folks here that can answer questions. We welcome those questions.
So I think that the school uniforms policy looks great, and I believe that there are schools that are doing it really well. I also appreciate that, each school can decide on whether they want uniforms or not. I think my only concern is the dress and grooming policy that, yes, we have this as a policy, but I don't necessarily know if it's being upheld. I think that students should be able to express themselves, but I think it also needs to be in a very tactful manner. And so I think some clothing or articles of clothing have been too explicit, maybe, or which can serve as a distraction. I think the short skirts and things, I find that very problematic. Then that's just my own personal opinion. And I was wondering, how we can do a better job of making sure that our students are not coming with their bellies out, or they're not coming, not dressed in attire that presents being focused on learning. And I hope that I'm saying that in a very constructive way, but I do think that just in my personal experience as a parent and just also as a community member, there has been some concerns regarding some attire.
Is there any response administrators would like to share? And we'll come and I promise. No.
Thanks, Dan. Okay. Totally understand. And so what we can do and what we will do is review each year. Principals go over with their student body the expectations, the code of conduct. Each year, students, families are asked to sign off on the fact that they've read, acknowledged, agreed to the code of conduct. So we can talk with principals when they have their ways and means assemblies to review both of those pieces. I do think it gets rather sensitive. Some of the topics, especially, male, female principal, those situations. However, most schools have someone, either their PBIS committee chair or someone who can help address it in the most sensitive way.
I have a couple of thoughts too, but Jim, is there anything you want to share? Well, and this may be a question. This might be a question for Kendra or for Interim Superintendent Murphy, but we could have a problem where the policy isn't clear enough, the student handbook isn't clear enough.
Mm-hmm.
We could have a different problem where, no, it's quite clear, but we have an enforcement issue. And so what the issue, the reason we're not seeing the results that we want is because people aren't applying the policy as faithfully as we need them to. The reason I think that distinction matters is I just think it points us in different directions for how we address it, you know? And so like we could, if the current policy is getting ignored, our rewriting it will also get ignored. And so I just love it. Just people have a perspective on like what the root cause of the issue is.
I appreciate what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but I think with the grooming, it's a lot of times an opinion. An opinion, what's too short, what's inappropriate, what's explicit. And some people, you know, your opinion may vary. And some of this we're talking about taste and preference, and that's going to vary from human being to human being.
And I can receive that. I guess my question to you would be, from your lens, what would be kind of the appropriate way to address something that honors everyone?
Yes, and I think a broad going over the policy and expectations with the student body, but should there become a concern, I definitely think it is a one-to-one conversation as opposed to maybe a whole class or whole setting situation where you're sensitive. Some of this might be children's clothing getting a little too small. Some of it could be cultural with body type, and we want to be careful. Some of it, I'll go as far as head wrap dressing, could be a cultural piece for some people, where some culture is keep your head wrapped, other culture is remove your wrap when you come in the building. So body type, some clothes are designed to fit a particular way. And leggings might be more affordable for some than others. And I don't want this to sound like excuses, but experience in being in schools. And I can tell you, even at the primary ages, designers are making crop tops for kids. And that's what you find in the stores. So it can be challenging for families to find appropriate things. But I do think it's a very sensitive conversation that has to be had.
Yeah. And I wholeheartedly honor all of those perspectives. You know, so not trying to limit what you are conveying to us, but I think there are some things that, again, are very intentional. So yes, we want to make sure that we're respecting religious attire. We want to make sure that we are sensitive and mindful to body types, all of those things. Again, I think my concern is the intentional, your full belly is out, right? Or there's an intentional, the bubble skirts, or, you know, that to me doesn't necessarily align with maybe access to clothing. I think that's just preference. And so I think as a district, we do have, or we can have a way of having that standard and that expectation about how we present ourselves. So that's just my only concern.
I do understand what you're saying, 100%.
Thank you.
Last question, then I think we would welcome the constituent perspective. I think I value the exchange. Feels great. Unclear what's going to happen next. And so I just wanted to ask, like, what is going to happen? I'm not looking for one right answer or another right answer. I just wanted to understand what the proposal is for going forward. Because what I think what we're not proposing is change the policy language, which is fine. I just wanted to make sure you got response.
Yeah, and I think for me, I can lean into the specifics of the policy a little bit more to see if it addresses what you discussed. Is it how the policy is written, or is it just an enforcement matter? So yeah, so I would just like to spend a little bit more time with that, if that's okay.
So maybe we'll keep this as Phyllis is helping us build our list of things that we're going to look at for the rest of the year. This would go in the category, and maybe we come back to it. And we'll come back to it sooner rather than later. As it's still early in the school years, we'll put on September queue.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for my clarity in terms of next steps, is there anything your pleasure, in addition to reminding and reviewing about the policy and the need to enforce or support, is there any other ask at this time?
It's a great question.
No.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, did you? Yeah.
This might be a question more for general counsel, but maybe the superintendent also. Is there, doing a one-on-one, are the risks with that? And also, is there training around how to handle that for the principals? And is that training consistent across the district?
I don't know of any training from our school district, but as a former principal, I would know who would be skilled in those conversations in my building. And so we can add that to the conversation with the principals in terms of how this is done in a delicate and respectful manner.
And I did have one other question. It's not about the dress and grooming, but it is about the uniforms. And there's nothing that needs to be changed about the policy. I did see though in here, it stated that if students or families are not able to, purchase uniforms, that there's additional funding that will help to support those families. Can you speak about where that funding comes from and how students are able to gain access to that?
So we have Neediest Kids of All funding that we are allocated as a school district that is shared with individual buildings. Tracy Stillwell out of our school community partnership office oversees that funding. In addition to the funding, we have lots of partners, Operation School Bell, for example, who will help to provide school uniforms. A lot of schools have what we have called groom rooms these days. Our resource coordinators are excellent at helping to try to find uniforms, and some of your principals go out and buy themselves and others.
Thank you for that.
So if anyone ever runs into a problem with uniforms, they definitely should communicate and let us know. There are lots of resources, people who want to help. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Jillian. I am a parent and a teacher and a community member. And I wrote the initial email, and I did have an ask about change in the policy language. And so in the uniform policy, it says students shall not suffer an academic penalty, i.e. in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, or a student sent home for failure to wear the school uniform. However, that language is not in the dress code policy. And allegedly, I have heard many, many students getting sent home on the first day of school for not adhering to a dress code that they weren't even sure what it was, or staying in the office until a parent could bring them clothes, but parents are at work. Parents get mad and say, whatever, just come home. So if our concern is we do everything for the kids and every day counts, we should not be taking them out of the classroom because someone thinks their shorts are too short. And there are intentional too shorts, but across the board, the dress codes I've seen are applied, but not uniformly. And so a lot of our students who have bigger bodies are getting pulled out. And I've heard people say, well, if they can't find shorts that fit them, they just need to wear pants. But that's not fair to them. And so my ask is just that we can add that language and potentially come up with some solutions for what the consequence is. Because I'm not saying there shouldn't be a consequence for the dress code violations, but can we give them a DT instead of saying go sit in the office? Because we ran out of clothes. Somebody ran out of clothes in their building. And so I don't want them sent home because they're here. That's the first biggest step. So why make them leave?
Thank you very much. I would love, before we hear from others, to give the administration a chance just to share any reactions you all have.
I think we agree children should not be penalized. We definitely agree with that. We'll add that to our review in our conversation.
Thank you. Okay, so let's keep moving. We've got next one on here is Policy Committee 2024 meeting calendar, which I believe we addressed earlier, right? In terms of what had been on tap. inviting board members to share requests for topics, inviting administration to propose topics. Anything else there?
Can I just put a bow on that last one? So
Yeah.
we're gonna bring both uniform and dress and grooming back next policy committee meeting.
That's right.
And propose the same language that's in the uniform policy to add to dress and grooming, that
Mhm.
students shall not suffer a removal
Yeah.
consequence.
Right.
Like, you're not
Yeah.
sent home.
I think that's right. And also open for any other thoughts you have
Yeah.
between now and next meeting.
Yeah, and again, I agree with what you're saying. I appreciate adding that language, and I think it's just incumbent upon us to make sure that we're specific in our policy.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, no, it's good. And I think we also have an important one on 6320 with some proposed changes to the goods and services policy.
We do. Sorry. And we have our esteemed chief operating officer here to talk about it. Chris Burkhardt.
So thank you very much for allowing us to have this conversation. So you do have in front of you some changes that we would either like to make to the policy or get guidance from the committee on moving forward, how we look at the word local within the policy. So we're not necessarily asking for the policy to change. However, we gave recommendations for the change in language. However, we're looking for direction. So as we look at the policy that was revised on September 29th of 2022, that was just shortly after I started with the district and started looking at our procurement processes. And as we develop the goals and guardrails, specifically guardrail number 4 goes to local minority and women-owned organizations that we are doing business with. So as we started taking a deep dive on the data, we found that typically when we asked vendors how they're categorized in one of those 3 categories, that we were just allowing folks to self-report. And so as we were looking at the word local, all 4,000, for example, all 4,000 vendors would define local how they thought local should be defined. And so as we started cleaning up that data, we found, and we took some folks off from Florida who we didn't consider to be local, and folks from California off that we didn't consider local. And so as we started to take a deep dive into where folks are located, as well as where we are remitting our payment to, as well as where maybe they have a parent organization, we found that this gets really, really muddy. So we spent over the past year looking at how can we define local, or how can we put some parameters around the word local that not only goes to guardrail 4 and wants us to prioritize those companies that are truly local, as well as look at other board policies, for example, the good food purchasing, as well as try to keep things both in the state of Ohio and in southwestern Ohio. So what our proposal is, and we're looking for feedback, is really a 4-tier system. So we would have 5 categories, 5th category meaning not local at all. So the first definition of local, and we would also tie this back to our purchasing initiatives. So as we are evaluating a company for purchasing, they would be given either 4 points for being the highest level of local, all the way down to 0 points for being not local at all. And so the highest point value would be 4 points if someone is within the boundaries of the district. So if you are within the boundaries of CPS, you will receive 4 points. You would receive 3 points if you are in the municipal statistical area. And it's really hard to say 3 times, but and that goes into, northern Kentucky, that goes into eastern Indiana, and, a little bit further up around the 275 loop. And so I think we all can agree that those areas are really part of Cincinnati. They're really part of the lifeblood that gives the city its life. And we have a lot of employees who may not live in the city, but maybe live inside the 275 loop. And so we want to acknowledge that as well within this process. The third is 90 miles from this building. And the reason that we wanted to look at that, and we really toiled back and forth as we looked at best practices and what other districts are doing, we wanted to get a larger purview of what local meant, but we didn't want to go up to and include Columbus. We didn't want to go up to and include Louisville. We didn't want to go up to and include Indianapolis. So that 90 miles gets us pretty close, but really differentiates Cincinnati from those other big cities that we're close to. And then finally, the fourth, which would be 1 point, would be 250 miles within this building. And the reason being is, one is we want to recognize Ohio proud. And so we don't want to not look at those companies that are in Toledo or Cleveland and maybe give them preference because they are an Ohio company versus someone outside the state. Also, our Good Food Purchasing Program looks at farms and where we get our produce and milk and some of our other proteins. And so as we look at that as well, Cincinnati doesn't have a really long growing cycle. So we are looking forward to expanding that to be part of what is already board policy, which is 250 miles for those food products. So we're incorporating that into this as well. And so we're looking at also, as we dive into each company and each corporation, each vendor that we use, looking at them specifically. For example, and I'll give you one that if we ask 5 different people, we'll get 5 different answers. Peterman Bus Company, we remit our payment to, and their parent company is out of Dallas, Texas. However, all of our bus drivers who drive our yellow buses for Peterman are local. We know where the bus lot is. We can go drive over there from here. It's over by Roselawn. It's, a 15-minute drive. Yet we don't consider them local because we remit to a parent company. So we're starting to peel back those layers of the onion. And this goes to also, I said earlier, Guardrail 4, where we will present on Monday, where we have taken the most stringent definition of local for Guardrail 4 on this last or on the next report that we're going to give. And that number then shrinks the number of local vendors that we have significantly because we're going by just those vendors who are in the city of, or I'm sorry, not the city of Cincinnati, the boundaries of the district. And so I know I've talked a lot, but I'll be happy to get feedback and hear which direction that we should be going for this.
Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate it. Comments, questions, board members, Kendra or Jim?
Great work. I mean, this is a good way to sort of discern how effective we are in supporting local businesses. I had a couple questions on the women-owned. Do we differentiate between women-owned and certified women?
Good question. So in the past, as I said, everyone has been self-reporting. And so we are looking at drilling down into those. So if they are reporting that they are women-owned, our next step is to ask for that certification, as well as minority-owned as well. Those two things go hand in hand. The next piece to that, after we get that, is also looking at veteran-owned. And so that is not part of our policy currently, but that's also something that we have on our radar to look at after we've looked at those two. We are actually partnering with a company called Payment Works that will also help verify our data for us. We don't have a very large team to verify data. So when folks say that this is where their brick and mortar building is that really a brick and mortar building or is that someone's house? And so we are starting to look at really drilling down to say, trust but verify. Give us the data, but we're going to verify that it's accurate.
Does that verification, would it enable to know if it was truly 50% full-time employees within the area?
Yes, exactly. And so that's our next step. If the committee and the board gives us the direction, we don't want to start that work before we get the direction from the board that's truly the direction that we want to go.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Chris. Kendra, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for this great work. It's very detailed. My only question is, this is not limiting us to only if we have a service that we need to purchase, is saying we're upholding the value of prioritizing this first. But if there is a service that's not within these surrounding areas, then we are still able to contract out other places, correct?
Yeah, think about it as a priority list. And so there's a whole bunch of factors that go into whether or not a vendor becomes a vendor with our district. And this is just one area of that. However, it is an area that the board feels strongly about, i.e. guardrail 4.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
because of that, we want to actually put weight to it as well. And we don't want it to be binary, either you're local or you're not. So I think by giving tiers gives everyone the ability to fall within the spectrum.
Yeah, no, thank you. Great job.
Thank you again. I think I really appreciate the work. Everything you shared seems to make great sense. I think I had like one question, one comment. And this is if memory serves, I could be wrong about this. For any policy, the administration can go write its own procedures for how to apply that policy. And so I think my question was, it seems like all these things make sense. I have no problem putting them in policy, but couldn't you also just do them by putting them into the procedures? Because they don't seem at odds with anything that we've written. And so I wanted to hear just a little bit more about why put them in policy versus just have a procedure that does this anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've been talking about this for a little over a year, and we've had the conversation back and forth. One of the things that it could be just, guidance that the board says, develop this and we support it. The reason that we brought it to this committee is that it's tied to guardrail 4. And that's really, if it weren't tied to guardrail 4, I would say probably, yes, let's just provide our internal support on how this is actually working. But because the board has specifically called this out is why we thought it should come to this committee. We're not saying that it needs to be part of the policy. If that is the recommendation of this committee, we're fine with that as well. We were giving the option that if you wanted to fold it into the policy, this is what that language could look like, but obviously it doesn't have to.
That's a great answer. That makes sense. I think if that's the motivation, I really think we need to give it some airtime with the full board. Because we're 3 of us, but not a majority of the board. I think it all sounds great to all 3 of us, it sounds like, but if you want to be able to check that box that, oh yeah, this is right with the board, given the guardrail that the board wrote, then I think some airtime around this would be great. And maybe we can make it short. My worry would just be that you all have done all this. You're asking all the right questions. We say sounds great, and then 2 board members who aren't in the room have concerns about something, and that makes your life more difficult, and so we could avoid that if we do this with the full group. Is that's my proposal? Does that sound okay? Yeah.
I was just going to add, and Chris and I have talked about this, but there have been there have been municipalities who have tried to pass very, very protectionist legislation, saying that we will only use, this is Cleveland mostly, we will only use contractors within the city of Cincinnati or within the city of Cleveland. We will only use construction contractors who employ all of their employees within the city limits of Cleveland. And the state has at time then pushed back, arguing with home rule arguments or who has the authority to enact those kind of legislation. School districts tend to get less attention on this stuff. This is very well drafted. It's very well thought through. It's consistent with what we've seen with other boards of education, throughout the state. So we feel good about it, but wanted to at least put out there that there have been times when, and particularly in the construction trades, where there has been sort of state back and forth with municipalities about these kinds of local hire provisions, just as a general sort of caution to us.
Yeah, and I appreciate the care that's gone into the drafting. I'll also say something, I didn't say this earlier, but as I was preparing for the meeting today, I was reading the other requirements that follow this section. And I worked with the policy committee, 3-4 years ago to try to get these in here. And they're things like checking to see whether a bidder provides contributions to healthcare plans for employees, whether the bidder contributes to an employee pension or retirement program, whether the bidder has maintained or participated in an apprenticeship program registered with the Ohio State Apprenticeship Council. I think those were all good things that we added here. And just to say out loud and to check, in public, none of what's been written
Mhm.
is at odds with that or would undermine that in any way. This is just a way of being much more rigorous and really, trying to exclude our friends from Florida who are pretending as though they are from Cincinnati.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely correct. And this is here just to provide a little bit more support and guidance for those folks out there. And truly, I'm looking at those individuals who may have a office outside of Cincinnati. And this might encourage them to put an office in Cincinnati to provide service to our students.
Great. And I think just in terms of timing, we would completely defer to, oh, sorry. Yes, Treasurer.
Just one quick comment. Given the history of the district, I would highly recommend putting those definitions that Chris outlined in the policy so that they're very transparent and publicly noticed. And just given a history a few years ago, it's better if we just keep it all out there and very transparently defined.
Sounds like you're thinking of some specific things. Are you comfortable sharing them?
We just had a event at a board meeting where it almost turned riotous. Were you there? You may not have been the president yet. It was very ugly about supplier diversity. And so I said, just the more transparent and publicly defined we are, the better off we are.
That sounds like another good argument for why they should be in policy, and not just as a rule. Jim, yeah.
I just want to echo the treasurer's comments. I like that it's going to be more transparent. I think that's going to be helpful to us and also to the vendors.
Okay, last call. Any other comments? I was just going to say, in terms of timing, I would defer to administration as to, when you all need this, what the length of other board meetings looks like. We could do this soon. We could do this, in the spring. We could do this whenever you all think the time is right. Okay, moving right along. We're going to go to, did I miss somebody?
I was just gonna say soon, because this can have a very positive impact on the way we report out budgetary dollars.
Great. So again, defer to you all for when you'd like to see that. Okay, we're on to number 7, I think, which is wellness.
Yes, and again, our Chief Operating Officer and esteemed Food Services Director, Dining Services Director is here as Jessica Shelley and Chris Burfoot.
So thank you. Not to monopolize the microphone today, but I'm going to open and then pass it off to Director Shelley and her team for all the great work that they've done on this. Just a little background for those of you who don't know, USDA requires every district to have a wellness policy, and that's spelled out very clearly. Additionally, Dining Services collaborates with almost every department within the district to get feedback and to actually operationalize the wellness policy and through the operations of the district. We are required every 3 years to do an assessment of the wellness policy, the triennial assessment, and that's done through a process called WellSat. And additionally, once we do that process, every 5 years, USDA and Ohio Department of Education comes in and reviews that policy, as well as what the recommendations from WellSat are. So we just recently wrapped up an administrative review. We recently wrapped up the WellSat guidelines. We have a very, very good wellness policy. Let me start there and say we have a very, very good wellness policy. We have a lot of folks in the district who collaborate and make sure that we are moving that policy forward. That's just not words on a page. And so as we move forward right now, we're bringing some of those recommendations from not only the WellSat, but the ODE audit to say, you guys are doing great. Here's additional things to consider. Again, what we are showing here today is not necessarily things that we have to write into policy. These are recommendations from WellSat saying that if you want to be the gold standard, these are the types of things that you should add to the policy. So again, I'll let Jessica and her team talk more about it. All of these are things, with exception of one, all these things are things that we are doing anyway. So there's no change in our practice. What it would be doing is adding and memorializing things we're already doing so that we can say, as part of our policy and to get a higher WellSat score, here are things that we're already doing and we just want to add it to the policy. So with that, I will let Director Shelley take over.
Yeah, thank you, Chief Burkhart. So again, I want to reiterate that almost everything here we're already doing. We're just not giving ourselves credit for actually doing it by putting it into our wellness policy and therefore getting the credit when it comes to our WellSat evaluation from USDA and ODW. So Rob, if you go to slide 3 for me, I think we can kind of flip. So there are actually a couple different proposals that we want to ask the board for consideration. The first one is to increase the goal numbers that we have currently. We have 5. We want to increase that to 7, again, to reflect what we're currently doing in our district and give credit where credit is due. So our goal area 5, we actually want to change it from just physical activity to changing it to nutrition education curriculum specifications that we're already implementing through our curriculum team here in our district. Because of that, we want to break out and have an additional goal area 6, which talks about physical education, health education curriculum, and goal area 7, which then would be our physical activity specifications. We then also would like to include an update of language to include current initiatives that are not in the board policy, but are being done, but we can't claim it on our WellSat that we're doing it if it's not present in the board policy. And the third one is that we have so much integration right now with our new green schoolyard partnerships in goal area 1 and area 5 that again, we can't claim on our WellSat for credit because it's not written into the policy. Can you go to the next slide, please, Rob? So our overall WellSat score currently right now sits at 71%. If we were able to add some of these initiatives, we would actually go up to 87%. So we're really excited about the possibility of having that WellSat score increase by literally 16% just from including things we are already actively doing in our district. Go to the next slide, please, Rob. So the first one that we're already actively doing in our district is adding language for students that are receiving nutrition education at all grade levels. This is something our curriculum department has been doing for several years, but because we haven't addressed it in our board policy, we can't claim it for credit on our WellSat score with USDA or with ODW. Next slide, please, Rob. We also want to add amendments into wellness area 2, which is goal area 4, around meal nutrition policy guidelines on techniques to promote our school meals. So one of the things they look at is how are you promoting different wellness in meals. So for example, we've created a vegan menu. We have a vegetarian menu that's offered. We have marketing campaigns at our high schools and our elementary schools that are not written into our board policy, but are actively being done. We want to give credit where credit is due and be able to get that on our WellSat. One of the things also that we didn't write into board policy, but we want to address is encouraging our principals to consider seat time for our students after they've received their meals. CDC recommendations is that every child should have at least 15 minutes of seat time to eat their breakfast and 20 minutes of seat time to eat their lunch. We want to write that into the policy as an encouragement, not a requirement, because we know that different schools have different, aspects of their master schedule they need to consider. You go to slide number 7 for me, please. So goal area 3 for our WellSat assessment, we wanted to add the addendum in here that food and beverages will be discouraged as rewards for students. And the district will provide information and training and creative non-food rewards. Again, these things are already occurring, but we don't have them actually written into our board policy. So we're looking to write into our board policy. And I think it's important to call out the fact that our wording here is very intentional, that it's discouraged, it's not prohibited, that will provide information and training, it's not required. So we're wanting to make sure that we are going into this with the options for our schools to really decide on their own how they want to develop this for their students. Goal area 4 on the next slide, Rob, discusses things again that we're already doing, language for physical education instruction time, that we're giving the half-hour credit of PE, that our elementaries have PE offered year-round for our students. We also want to add language that encourage physical activity breaks during the school day at grade levels. And I see that all the time. We go into classrooms and teachers are doing the stretches, and we're not giving ourselves credit for the things we're already implementing in our classrooms. You go to slide 9, please. Our final ask of inclusion is to add language around marketing and advertising of nutritious foods. Again, we just installed brand new monitors actually in every single one of our secondary schools that broadcast out the different options that we're offering for our kids. If you go up and in any school right now, you'll see we are advertising tortellini Tuesdays, which is one of our new vegetarian options that has a cheese-filled tortellini. Right now, we're advertising that our pizza of the month for August is our barbecue chicken pizza, which is things we want to make sure that we're getting credit for in initiatives and advertising these healthy meal options for our kids. Also strengthening language about not using lack of being able to participate in physical activity as a consequence. We want to make, we're not doing that. No child is limited. No physical activity is taken away from a child as a consequence in our district. And so therefore, we don't want to make sure that that's not something we're getting credit for since we've taken that initiative in our district. I did include on slide 10 a lot of resources. And also, I know I talked to Mr. Hoying about the red markup of the changes I don't think got submitted to the board.
We've got them.
If you want to click on that link, Rob, number 3, please.
I think it's part of it.
So this red line markup shows where we've actually included a bunch of these new policies and procedures into our current policy. We did do a highlighting that was to delineate out. The red highlight is the proposed changes to the policies, but we wanted to give credit to certain groups we've worked with on these policy changes. And the first one is if you see a purple highlight, that is actually work that we've done with Green Umbrella to highlight and call out our green schoolyards. If you see a green highlight, those are edits that have come to us from Liz Wolf and Emily Campbell in curriculum. Those are things that they are working on in conjunction with us to make sure they're included in the wellness policy because their team is already actively implementing them in their schools. So with that, I'm going to pause and take any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Kendra, Jim, questions, reactions?
Yes, I get the idea that we have to put this into the policies because when we get evaluated, we're saying, here's what we're going to do. And then are we doing it? Once we put this in the policy formally, are these new or activities we've been doing, are they sustainable? In other words, will it come back to haunt us if we don't live up to these in the future?
Yeah.
So two answers to that question. The first is there's no fiscal penalty and there isn't anything that DEW or USDA comes back and says to us, well, you said you're going to do this and you didn't do it. The WellSat is just that it's a marker on, of a 100-point scale on what that looks like. So we also, the second part is we also want to be aspirational to make sure that just because it's not written doesn't mean that there's things that we shouldn't hold ourselves to and try to do. So that's the second side of it. That's obviously a little bit less tangible than the first side, but we also want to make sure that if we're doing great things that we want to call them out as well as encourage us to go beyond those.
Yeah, and I think that also you'll see some of the language that we purposely wrote into this policy. For example, around the green schoolyard initiatives, we said as able, encourages. So we're not saying must have, executes. So we did try and make sure the language was not language that would be something that would be, detrimental to us if down the road those programs were no longer operational.
Thank you. So in terms of the wellness of our students, do we measure that in any way to see if as we're doing WellSat, do we know that it improves the wellness of students?
So this is a conversation Superintendent Murphy and I had just yesterday in relation to whole child, and I will defer to her on the bigger, broader picture, but it's obviously something that literally comes up almost in every daily conversation as we talk through all of operations. For example, all of operations touches the whole child, but then there's additional resources and district initiatives that we're also looking at.
And I definitely agree with Mr. Burkhardt and appreciate your question. What our team administratively understands is we overlap. We have to work together to move any initiative forward. So we have those conversations with each other and understand the impact that student dining services will have on what happens with our basketball coaches, even if you just think the whole spectrum of who we have in our schools. So yes, definitely.
Kendra.
So thank you for the presentation. My question is around the incorporation of spelling out more specifically the social and emotional aspect of wellness. I don't know if that's something that can be added, but just I perused it several times and I feel like that part was void. It touched upon it briefly, but it didn't really call out anything. And so I know that there's been a lot of work that has been done with Mind Peace. I know we have a great group of school counselors, within our district. And so I'm wondering if we can lean into that as well to really capture the full aspect of the whole child and wellness piece.
Absolutely. And so over the past, I'm going to call it 15 years or so, might be a few years longer than that. This was added to the USDA regulations for school districts, and what they tried to do in the first swath of this is make a very, very vanilla policy that would apply to every district across the country. Since then, as folks like Jessica and her team have really raised the bar on wellness, those areas of the WellSat have increased over time. And so it's not in the WellSat spelled out specifically like what you're talking about, but I would give it a year or two or maybe 3, and you will see it in the WellSat as part of what we're going to be required to look at. So this is one benchmark in time over a lifetime of making sure the student has the resources from a wellness perspective from the time they enter our district till the time they leave.
Thank you again. I'll do a couple questions, comments here. I will lead with, I think this is great. I think we should just pass these on. If that's what you are looking for, we should adopt all of them. Next paragraph. As a former 7th grade teacher, it is hard for me to give up the class earned pizza party because one of these was about discouraging food as rewards, right? Could you just talk about that a little bit? I think there was, there was power in kids having to work really hard together over a sustained period of time, and then earning a pizza party for doing really good work together. And it sounds like that's not what I should have been doing. And so I was just curious to hear you all talk about that a little bit.
So actually, I think that it's there's a clear delineation between food as a reward. I get what I do understand what you're saying here. This is one of the things the WellSat does focus on because I think that their more concern was like kids would get a pixie stick when they got 100 on a test. It wasn't not necessarily a global reward for a classroom. Ironically, one of the things we offer to our teachers is the opportunity to do a pizza party through our department and at no cost. So we actually have that opportunity for our staff. And so I don't want to discourage that kind of initiative.
Whole class pizza parties, okay. Pixie sticks for tests, not okay.
But, and also, yes, well, but that's why we kind of left the language a little bit hazy, because I also know as a parent of 3 kiddos, the way my kids learned how to do math was by building different towers with Skittles. So I'm not about to, so we really wanted to be careful in this one, not to necessarily just to call out and disallow all activities, but we wanted to actually give training and forethought into what could you use instead of food as a reward. So part of the things could be used, extra recess time, extra, quiet reading time. Could we use, stickers as a reward on a chart so that they build up their sticker tower versus having, a ticket to go shopping at a candy store? Can we do it so that the reward would be actually something, an apple slices or, a fresh fruit reward? versus Nature's Candy? Can we give them a Clementine? Versus having something that would be bought from or,
And you all were very clear, look, first of all, we're already doing these things. So there's no ask for people to change their behavior. We are codifying things to reflect what's already true. And you were very clear that there's encouragement, discouragement, not mandates. So I think you all were very clear on that. And I appreciate it. I think that the just handful of other questions I had was, I'd be interested in do you have a sense of how many districts use WellSat? Because it's not a requirement, right? Like we're choosing to do this. Or this is a required.
This is a requirement. So every 3 years, the USDA requires every single school district across the country to evaluate their wellness program based on the WellSat scoring system. And I actually included a link for you in the on slide number 10 that you can actually click on and actually view the WellSat requirements. But that is something that is required by USDA to evaluate your wellness program and then update the policy through the WellSat results.
So this is great, helpful. I will just link back to our AI policy earlier. I asked ChatGPT in this meeting, is WellSat required? And I will read you what it told me, which is its use is voluntary and not mandated by federal or state governments. So just let this be a warning that people need to notice that this is an emergent technology, but they're in charge of this stuff, not the machines.
I will tell you as recently as in our administrative review by ODW in January, we were required to provide for them.
I'll take you over the machine.
Our administrative review.
So it's my last question was just, I hear this as let's accurately get points for the things we're already doing. I'm sold. If we were to go higher than 87, like what's the next frontier for us for this? If we wanted to do even, not that we do it today, but just as you're thinking about the future, what's next?
I think WellSat, although there's a score there, I think it's more about changing the behaviors of not only students, but also adults within the district and how we go about doing that and what are the types of things. For example, we know that we have pizza parties to your example. What we want to make sure that we do is if we're offering pizza parties, are we offering, the most healthful type of pizza that students want to eat through that process, as well as how do we, link that to other wellness benchmarks throughout the district. And there are certain parts of WellSat that we will look at and say, never going to happen in CPS. So looking at that, some of those things, but I think looking globally to Superintendent Murphy's vision of whole child, I think that gets us there. But also as Board Member Mapp said, or that we discussed, this is going to be not necessarily a finish line. This is a process, and so WellSat next year may require 4 other things that we may or may not be doing.
So,
thank you. And yes, ma'am. Sorry.
But if you looked at the WellSat, the way they score the point system, a lot of the point systems are scored by. It's not mentioned at all in the wellness policy. It's encouraged in the wellness policy. It's required in the wellness policy. And there's some things that are in our wellness policy that are requirements, but some things are not. And so for example, to your point about the pizza party, at this point, I'm not comfortable saying that there will not be any food as rewards. There will not be any, but I think when you do that kind of, when you have that kind of requirement, I think that we become the food police. And I don't think that is anything that we need to be in our schools. So that's a lot of so when you say the next step would be to have a tighter language. But I think we need to be very intentional and have a process in terms of what things we want to choose to be required versus encouraged.
Thank you. Kendra, did you have a thought?
Yeah, so just final question. So we know that this is obviously something that we're using as a measurement. I'm wondering if this data will be aligned with the metrics for Guardrail 1 around the whole child, or if we are correlating that information similar to what we did in terms of identifying how students are doing in extracurricular and athletics. How are we coordinating that information?
I think that's a fabulous idea because we've been struggling with how are we really measuring this, that particular guardrail, and really concerned about if we're really being accurate and giving schools and kids and staff credit for the work that's being done. I appreciate that idea. Cool.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? We keep going. Okay, so I think we finished item 7. We're gonna break our old records here, everybody. Does anyone have any other business? I do not. Yes, we'll get there for number 9. Oh, that's a great idea. Thanks, Rob. This is the brains of this outfit. So following this next discussion item, we will give anyone who is either in the room or who is watching online a chance to speak. We usually do 2 minutes or 3 minutes. 2 minutes, great. So if you're online and would like to speak for up to 2 minutes, please use the raise your hand icon, and we'll get to you in just a moment. Does anyone have any other business today? Treasurer Wagner.
Just real quick, I don't know if this needs to be a board policy, maybe for the future, but it's definitely a state auditor policy now. We sent out a letter this week on the Ohio State Auditor has a requirement for every public employee in the state to take the fraud prevention training. So everybody check your emails because we will be audited. The good news is 970 out of our 6,500 employees have already done it just within the last couple of days, but I'm going to take every public opportunity to remind everybody because we want to make sure that we're in compliance. So we'll continue to report on it.
Thank you, Treasurer. Anybody have any questions about the fraud training? I got my email. I wrote it down. I haven't done it yet, but it's on there. It's on the list. Yep.
Kareem was the first one to get it done.
In the districts. All right. Any other new business, other business? Okay, Rob, do we have any online speakers today? Okay.
Allie, will you accept the request to bring you over as a panelist, please? Allie, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm actually standing outside of Pleasant Ridge Montessori right now, getting ready to go in and do some volunteer work. So sorry it's a little loud. I wanted to say 2 things really quickly. My name is Allie Goodman. I am a parent of 3 in the district and just in awe of all the hard work you guys do all the time. So to board member Crossett, welcome. Glad to see you sitting on policy. Have been excited to hear your voice and see your face at board meetings already. And I want to say kudos to everybody on this team for starting the policy work that's gotten us where we are thus far with the new cell phone, both from the state of Ohio standpoint and from within the districts. And so I know there's been a lot of hard work. I appreciate Hughes doing some of the work with the Yonder pouches and all of you for supporting that. So I am a preschool teacher by trade, educator all along, and I have done lots and lots and lots of reading on how these electronic devices in our pockets have ultimately changed childhood. So thank you for helping do what we can now to try to curb that. If you've not seen or listened to or read John Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, I highly, highly, highly recommend looking into some of that. I think he finally has the voice that's moving the needle with some of this. And he says cell phones should not be in schools. So thank you for doing that work. Thank you for doing all the board work. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Friday.
Teachers have known that all along.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goodman. Thank you for volunteering. Thank you for joining. Do we have folks in the room who would like to speak today?
I would.
Julie.
When you do the policy for the dress codes, I think that it's really important that maybe we have some students who have some input on it, because I know that I was at a high school few years ago and they were talking about dress code, and some of the girls felt like some of the dress code was body shaming, or it was to make them feel bad about it is body shaming, and they felt that it was discriminatory dress codes for the boys versus the girls. And so I think that it would be really we need to be really careful that we're not doing that.
Thank you very much. Any additional speakers this morning? Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for dealing with my hiccups and mix-ups as we start. I've been board president for 2 years. I've actually never chaired a committee before, so I'm sure I will make future mistakes. And absent objection, having no other business before us,